Welcome to TaNaCh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Rabbi Tovia Singer's Let's Get Biblical Q&A, coming to you from the Holy Land. Rabbi the man, Tovia Singer, is back. Welcome back, Rabbi. How are you today?
So good. Very, very good.
And it is most delicious to have you back. I know we had a plate of recording last week, just so we didn't miss you totally.
Yeah, last week you were competing with a little boy named Eliyahu.
Baruch
and
Hashem.
he's crazy cute. And he won. It was a competition.
I'm glad. I would have to question your judgment otherwise.
Yes, it was my seventh grandchild, and he is very yummy, very, very delicious. So I had the opportunity to spend time with him in the United States, and he's coming to Israel soon, so I'll have the opportunity to spend more time with him. So
Wow, that is
very
amazing.
excited. Yeah, it's going to be strange for a newborn to take a flight by himself, but I'm sure he'll be okay. I'm kidding. My daughter will be coming with the other grandchildren, so that's very exciting.
Wow,
Great to be.
That is such a blessing. That is such a blessing. Wow. Well, one of these days, hopefully I'll merit to have grandchildren of my own. Of course, my two youngest are way too young to have kids, in my opinion. So, yep. Oh, yeah. And
Okay.
make sure your camera's on.
The camera, everything, that's all beautiful.
Yes, very, very good. Oh, man. Well, it's certainly been a long missing week without you. 2 weeks, that is.
Absolutely. This is the flagship show. I mean,
it is. Of course it is.
without this, you'll be selling pencils from a tin cup. So it's good that we work this. Yeah, I know, it made you a little nervous, but we're all good now.
It's
We're all
okay.
good, ready to go.
We'll survive. Okay.
Yeah.
That being said, shall we move right on into our first caller? Call your name. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Yeah, I'd like to find out Matthew, I forget the Jesus, oh not Matthew, Mark, where Jesus is on the cross and they attribute him saying, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? I'd like to know what the purpose of that being there. I know it's a misquote from Psalm 22:1. I'm wondering what the Rabbi is able to do with that passage, why it's misquoted. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Hang up now, Jane, for the answer. Rabbi, that's a good one.
That is a good one.
My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Interesting.
All right. Well, as it turns out, that what's called the cry of dereliction appears both in Mark and in Matthew. It appears both in Mark 15:34 and Matthew 27 verse 46. And what the gospel authors are doing, Matthew simply copied Mark, as Matthew tends to do. Matthew essentially quotes almost all of the book of Mark. What the gospel writers are doing is they're simply copying, pasting from the book of Psalms and taking passages that are not prophecies and then placing them in the mouth of Jesus. They're using Sefer Tehillim, the book of Psalms, as a sort of as a palette for which a painter creates a painting. One thing, William, I can hear your audio in my headphones. Okay, so this is all very strange. Let's assemble this together. The strange thing about the cry of dereliction, because we're told in both Matthew and Mark, and as I told you, Matthew is copying Mark verbatim, and at 9 o'clock in the afternoon, in the third hour in the afternoon, which means 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Jesus cries out with a loud voice. This is him on the cross, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And that comes from Psalm 22. It's verse 1 in a Christian Bible, but it's verse 2 in a Hebrew Bible. And there's the reason why this difference appears is not nefarious. It's just that the Christian Bibles copy the format of the Septuagint, so they don't assign the first opening passage to a verse number. So that's all it is, okay? What is happening here is King David is crying out. King David, as we have seen in the chapters that introduce this passage, is in a lot of trouble. I mean, imagine the pain that he experienced. I mean, it would be hard to imagine what you would do, God forbid, if the people who you love betrayed you. Has that ever happened to you? Imagine your own son wanted to kill you. Imagine if your father-in-law wanted to destroy you. Imagine if the people closest to you wanted to bring you down. And I would imagine that the pain you've experienced in your life has more likely to come from people who are very close to you rather than strangers. It didn't come from a cashier at Walmart, but rather the people that are close to you. And King David is crying out. This is all going to lead to Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. That means all these chapters that start out many, many passages earlier, going back to Psalm 16, 17, all very famous. King David is crying out. None of this, incidentally, makes any sense when applying it to Jesus. And the authors of the Gospels knew this, particularly Mark understood this. So when he quotes, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He stops there. If you keep reading the text, Rachak mishuosi divrei shagosi. The text continues, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Eli, Eli, loma azavtoni. But then he says, Rachak mishuosi divrei shagosi, which means your salvation is distant from me, the words of my groaning. Literally, by the way, the same word for salvation is in there. What does that mean? Like, first of all, why would Jesus be crying out, why hast thou forsaken me? It makes no sense in itself. Why? Because we are told in the Gospels, in the same Gospels, whether it's Mark chapter 8 or Matthew chapter 16, that Jesus knew all this already. So why is he asking the question? Moreover, why does he feel that God forsook him? We are told in the Gospels that Jesus said, this is exactly what's supposed to happen to me. So why is he crying? And of course, why did the Gospel stop short when he says, Rachek mishuasi, your salvation is far from me? What are you talking about? Your salvation is far from me. I am salvation. If you're Jesus, what does it mean far from me? Jesus already said he's going to have to suffer many things, but he's going to resurrect on the third day. It literally says that. So what is he talking about? There are, it should be said, different versions of Jesus's passion narrative. In fact, there are 7 different things that Jesus says on the cross, but in Mark's iteration, Jesus is clueless. It's very, very different than Luke, and it's extremely different than John. In Luke, we don't have Jesus not understanding what's happening. In Luke, we have a much more informed Jesus, a Jesus who's much more in control in his conversations with God before his crucifixion. He knows exactly what's happening on his way to be crucified. As he sees women weeping, he says to them, don't weep for me, but weep for yourselves. Very, very much in control. It's a very different kind of Jesus going to his death. And then Jesus says in Luke's version, which is, I think, much later, forgive them, Father, for they don't even know what they're doing. Jesus is having a highly intelligent conversation with the other 2 people who were crucified with him, because in Luke's iteration, one of those people who are being crucified with him actually believes in Jesus, and Jesus says to him that you will be with me in paradise today. So we have a very different idea or picture of Jesus's crucifixion in Luke, and very different in the book of John. Jesus is just completely in control. But Mark and Matthew, Jesus is really just clueless. He has no idea why this is happening to him. He just doesn't understand, which is very different. But the key point that I want to drive home is that in Psalm 22, the church repeatedly uses this chapter. It marshals this chapter, a better word. It weaponizes this chapter. It plagiarizes this chapter. It misappropriates this chapter. That's good. Misappropriates it. Because these passages in Psalm 22 are not prophecies about the future. Psalm 22 is King David speaking. The author is speaking in the first person. He's not saying in the future someone else will say this. King David is crying out. In fact, he's wondering aloud, if you continue reading Psalm 22, like, why aren't you there? Why is it quiet? Why don't you answer me? He doesn't understand it. I cried at night, you're not there. And King David says, you listen to my ancestors, but to me, you're silent. Why? Well, this doesn't make any sense if you apply to Jesus. It makes